Welcome to Ethics Matter. I'm Stephanie Tsai. Our guest here in the Carnegie Council studio is Andrew Yang. He is an entrepreneur and the founder of Venture for America, a fellowship program that's given young entrepreneurs the opportunity to start businesses and create jobs in American cities. He's also an author, and his most recent book is called The War on Normal People: The Truth About America's Disappearing Jobs and Why Universal Basic Income is Our Future. It is jobs that Andrew Yang clearly cares about. And Andrew, thank you first of all so much for being here. The reason you have written this book about universal basic income is because you worry about automation. And when I read about you, a lot of times it was associated with this concern that there would be some sort of robot apocalypse.
Yes.
So let's start there first. Are you worried that robots are going to take over?
Well, I am, but it's not like walking robots that are going to come in and replace you and me in the studio. It's actually the case that robots started arriving in the American economy around 2000 and started displacing large numbers of manufacturing workers from then till now. So if you look at the numbers, American manufacturing workers went down from about 17 million to 12 million between 2000 and 2015. And of those 5 million jobs lost, the vast majority, 80%, were due to robots and automation. So it's not that robots are on the horizon. They've actually been here for a while. The reason why I'm so passionate about this is I spent the last 6 years in Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Baltimore, and other cities that have really experienced the throes of automation over this past couple of decades. And I worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs in these regions trying to create new jobs. And I learned a number of things over those years. One was the impact of automation on these communities. It's been very, very negative. You can see very large numbers of distressed people in these communities that haven't found new opportunities. And the businesses that are coming up typically do not employ large numbers of high school graduates. They employ smaller numbers of engineers and college graduates very typically.
So it's the blue-collar workers that have suffered, but we've been hearing definitely in this last election cycle that that's globalization, that's bad trade deals. But you're saying that based on the statistics you've seen, 80% of manufacturing jobs in 2000 were actually lost to automation.
Yeah, so automation's a much bigger driver of job displacement than globalization and certainly immigrants. And that's something that the American people I believe are coming around to. That there was a recent survey that showed that 70% of Americans believe that technology, AI, software, all of these things are going to eliminate many more jobs than they're going to create over the next 10 years, which is 100% correct. That they're right. Yeah. So we're waking up to the reality. We're right now in the third or fourth inning of the greatest technological and economic shift that we've ever experienced as a society. It's the greatest shift in human history.
That shift, though, again, I take it back to the time horizon starting from the Industrial Revolution, but really in earnest in the 60s and 70s with machines and replacing workers on the assembly line. What is different about this time that calls for drastic solutions? Is it AI and machine learning?
So part of it, and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this, is that if you start digging into the numbers, you see that we are in the midst of this process and that our society is not dealing with it very well. So you see these misleading numbers about the unemployment rate on the headline saying, oh, it's 4.2%, it's near full employment, not full unemployment. And then you think, oh, things must be good in the labor market. But what that's masking is that our labor force participation rate is down to a multi-decade low.
That's right.
Of around 62.9%, which is comparable to the rates in El Salvador and the Dominican Republic. Much lower than it's been in past periods. 95 million Americans are out of the workforce and aren't considered as part of the unemployment rate, including almost 1 out of 5 in the prime working age of 25 to 34.
Wow.
So there's a lot of weakness that our headlines are not digging into. And a lot of that is driven by this progression. So when people talk about the Industrial Revolution, I honestly get a little bit frustrated because it was a different transition. It was much less dramatic. It didn't affect as many industries. And if you look at it, there were actually widespread protests and problems that arose. Labor unions came into existence around 1886 in response to the early industrialization.
And there was real social instability. Are you concerned
Yes.
about social instability becoming an issue with automation, or do you think that is happening?
Yeah, if you look at the numbers, it's definitely happening. The suicide rate among middle-aged white Americans has surged to unprecedented levels. Our life expectancy as a society has declined for 2 straight
There's
years.
the opioid crisis.
7 Americans die of opioid overdoses every hour. So the social disintegration is already clear. It's just we're not paying attention to it because our government, instead of putting up measurements that we could all understand, like, hey, life expectancy declining, that's shocking and terrible in a developed country. That's
Right.
actually almost unprecedented. How is this happening? Why? And so automation has been tearing its way through the economy and society already, and we are coming apart at the seams. Donald Trump, in my opinion, is president today because we automated away millions of manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, which were essentially the swing states he needed to win.
But you don't hear Trump talking about that, and there's a lot more focus. Why do you think there's less political engagement on this issue? And by the way, I forgot to mention that you have announced your candidacy for president in 2020. Why do you think there hasn't been more political engagement on this issue? I don't know of any other candidate that's made universal basic income, which, by the way, we're going to get to, his platform.
Well, one of the reasons I'm running for president is that leading up to this, so I'm the CEO of Venture for America. My organization has helped create thousands of jobs. So I'm meeting with senators and governors and the president and other people. And with a couple of them, I would say to them, hey, according to what I'm seeing, we are automating away millions of jobs, and it's about to get much, much worse very fast. Because I have dozens of friends in Silicon Valley, and they will tell you in private that what they are doing is going to get rid of many, many jobs.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, they've actually come out in favor of
Universal basic
some
income.
sort of universal basic income because they know.
They do know. I mean, if you put them on a panel, they might say, oh, some jobs will be created, some will be destroyed. But they know that the focus of their activities is trying to save companies money. And most of the time that means taking an activity that humans are doing and automating it.
Right.
So the example that I talked about in the New York Times was truck driving. So the incentives to automate truck driving are $168 billion per year. And that's why we have the smartest people in the country working on it, because they know there's a giant pot of gold. And that's the way our system works. So I saw that this was happening, and I would talk to these government leaders, and I would say, hey, guys, like, this seems to be the main problem. It's driving all of these other issues. What are we going to do about that? And I literally had politicians say to me, we cannot talk about that.
Yeah.
And the reason why they cannot talk about it is because the solutions are too dramatic, and it makes them seem extreme and alarmist. So what they'll do is they'll talk about education and retraining. They'll say we need to retrain American workers for jobs of the future, which sounds great.
But where are the jobs going to come from?
Exactly. Well, part of it too is if you dig into, in my book, The War on Normal People talks about this, if you dig into the data on the success rates of government retraining programs, they're essentially entirely ineffective. There's almost no difference in outcome between a retrained group and a not retrained group. Another study had the efficacy rate at about 37%, which, and some of those 37% might have succeeded without the program. So and this is in instances when the government is spending thousands of dollars trying to retrain a worker, which is not going to be the case most of the time.
Right.
Because 1 in 10 Americans works in retail. 30% of the malls are going to close, and it's not like when a mall closes, they're going to be government retrainers around saying, hey, you just lost your job. So most Americans are not going to go through government-financed retraining, and even when it is offered, it doesn't work.
Before we get into the details of your universal basic income plan, one issue that I see right away with it, in other words, giving people a monthly income without conditions, is it doesn't seem to address the problem that you're describing in the large, broader sense, which is there are going to be fewer jobs for humans. How does it address an evolving economy where, the top 5 companies in the world by market capitalization are all tech companies that don't hire nearly the number of
Yes,
workers
true.
that like AT&T did in the 1960s when it
Yes.
was the largest company. So, how does this really address, an evolving economy? Or do you just have a society where people don't work? And it's sort of a Robin Hood economy in some ways where you sort of take and tax big tech that's using automation and redistribute to those that aren't engineers and that don't get a piece of that pie.
And this is where it gets really deep and human and philosophical,
Yeah.
which has been. Which
Sorry,
is
I got there a little earlier than you probably expected.
No, I got there too because I was writing this book, and I consider myself sort of like a practical economist type. But then you end up heading to the human and philosophical very quickly because you realize, hey, what should people be doing if? So using the truck drivers as an example, there are 3.5 million of them. Number 1 job in 29 states. 94% male, average age 49.
Yeah.
So you start imagining, okay, let's say we automate significant numbers of those jobs in the next 10 years. Like, what does the new world look like? And it can be shocking and frightening because let's say that transition goes poorly and then the ex-truckers riot in large numbers and block highways with their trucks because a lot of them own their trucks, which is another problem. The reason why our politicians struggle so much with this is that there's no quick fix, and universal basic income is a huge part of the solution, but it's only one facet of it. And the great thing about universal basic income is that it may allow us to redefine work, because right now we have this model of work that it's essentially a subsistence model. It's you should work to survive. You must show up. We'll pay you based upon how much time you spend, and you'll get like enough, maybe. There's actually very few great things about this entire technological shift. But the one potential bright spot is that it may allow us to redefine why we do what we do. And so my platform has a few main components. Universal basic income is one, but the second one, which is as important, is that we need to change how we measure value. GDP did not exist as a measurement until the Great Depression. And then things were going so badly that the government was like, we have to have a measurement to see how things are going and then try and improve it. And that's now a terrible measurement for our society because with automation and software and robots, GDP can go to the moon and more people can be completely excluded from that and left behind. So instead of GDP, we should be measuring things like childhood success rates, mental health, freedom from substance abuse, engagement with work, broadly defined, proportion of elderly in quality situations.
What might put environmental quality in
environmental sustainability, journalism, because not everyone's here in New York, working for organizations that are still vibrant journalistically. I mean, in small towns around the country, there's actually no...
We could have a whole discussion just about that. But what you're describing is what I've heard CEOs that I've interviewed describe as a triple bottom line. It's a version of that. It's a different way to measure. But it's really quite radical, Andrew, what you're suggesting, because by introducing a universal basic income, you're really talking about transforming society and transforming the way culture views value, right? Where do you think we are right now as a society in accepting that? I will say I've what were very academic discussions on the Carnegie Council stage about universal basic income seem to have gotten more and more in the mainstream.
Oh yeah.
Are we getting there, and what's propelling that?
I'm where I am because I believe that this is inevitable and we don't have a choice. And that the sooner we get there, the better off our society will be. That if we go too late, it's actually catastrophic. If we go too early, then that just gives us more time to build the new institutions that are necessary to complement it and get us through this transition. And the truth is, we are the richest and most technologically advanced society in human history, and we can easily afford $1,000 per American adult per month.
I've heard that would be 10 to 12% of GDP.
Well,
that's expensive.
Well, the great thing is that every dollar goes into the hands of an American consumer, and then the vast majority is just going to be spent and circulated through the economy.
So it would actually grow the economy.
Yeah,
That's the hope.
Well, the Roosevelt Institute tried to model it out, and you probably saw this,
Yeah.
where they found that universal basic income at $1,000 a month, which is what I'm proposing in my campaign, which we've called the Freedom Dividend, would grow the economy by 4.6 million jobs.
2.5 trillion.
And
By
2.5 trillion,
2025,
yes.
I pulled the information from the left-leaning Roosevelt Institute, who is, to their credit, doing a lot of research on how this will happen.
But I want to say it's common sense that most Americans are struggling. If they got $1,000 a month, what are they going to do? They're going to spend it in their town, like on their children, like paying bills. Like you can imagine Walmart, AT&T, like every major consumer company, all of a sudden their consumers would have more to spend. I mean, that's where the money's going to go. So it would clearly grow the economy. And I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs around the country. Entrepreneurs have their heads up and are trying to solve problems. They're often not people that are desperately trying to scramble to pay their bills month to month. If we implemented a universal basic income, it would be the greatest catalyst for entrepreneurship and creativity we have ever seen. They would create tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of new businesses.
Okay, two questions. The first being the downside, some have said it's just human psychology, is whether for a lot of people giving them free money, $1,000 a month, would take away their incentive to work. So what's your explanation for how we wouldn't end up in a society that would be less productive and less innovative?
I consider myself a facts-driven or data-driven person, and the data just does not show a reduction in work hours when you have income support, either here in the U.S. or Canada or in the developing world. In the U.S., they saw when they ran large-scale trials a slight reduction in work hours for two groups: young mothers and teenagers who stayed in school longer. And so universal basic income of $1,000 a month, it's not enough to prosper, really. It's enough to take the edge off of your need to survive, but there's virtually no one is going to look at that and say, oh, I'm all set.
But let me ask you the other, I think, really important question is, in your plan, how would you pay for this?
It's actually much more affordable than most people think. So the headline number is about $2 trillion. Our economy is about 19 trillion, so that seems like a lot. But if you dig into the numbers, you find that we're spending about $500 billion right now on income support in various ways: in-kind, food stamps, welfare, housing, Social Security, disability. And this would be overlapping. So if someone's receiving, let's say, $700 in benefits right now, then you go to them and say, hey, you can keep your current benefits, or you can go to the Freedom Dividend and get $1,000 a month free and clear.
So they would have the option.
They would have the option, but because we're already spending $500 billion, this thing is 25% paid for before you even get started. So the big problem we're facing as a society is that more and more work is being done by machines, robots, AI, software. And income tax is a terribly inefficient way of actually harvesting that value for the public. So if you look at it, who are going to be the beneficiaries of this transition to automation? It's going to be large tech companies who are excellent at not paying a lot of tax.
Very good at offshore
yeah,
tax
they'll just
havens.
move it over and say it all went through Ireland. Small tech companies, which are often not profitable, and then if they do get acquired, it's maybe a one-time thing, and they might have to pay on an acquisition at a certain point, but even then it's at a capital gains rate. So there's just not a lot of money that's going to be coming to the public, even as more and more work is going to be done by robots and software. So that's what we need to change, and that's the way we pay for universal basic income. The way we pay for it is we implement a value-added tax, which right now is in practice in every other industrialized country in the world except for us. And through a value-added tax then, so Amazon, now it's 43% of e-commerce, largest market cap. Jeff Bezos could be the first trillionaire. But there are periods when they said, hey, we didn't even make any money this quarter, so no income tax. Whereas a value-added tax, then they pay based on transaction, and that's inescapable. That's one reason why other countries use it, is that it's a much, much more effective way to get revenue. And so if you're a self-driving truck company, you might not have many humans making money, and so there's not much income tax coming, but a value-added tax, then we get we get our fair share. And a value-added tax would generate between $700 and $800 billion if we were to implement it at half the European level. The European average VAT is 20%. Our economy is so vast that if we had a VAT of 10%, it would generate $700 to $800 billion. So that is my primary mechanism to pay for the universal basic income, because you have 500 billion plus 800 billion in the VAT. So then you're at about 65% of the 2 trillion. And then the remainder, this is the beauty of universal basic income. We are already spending hundreds of billions on healthcare, incarceration, homelessness, like all of these services for people that are falling through the cracks, that those expenses would go down if these people are able to stay out of the emergency room.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because the Peterson Institute, I was looking at some of their research, apparently in the 70s in Manitoba, Canada, I feel like there was an experiment done with several thousand people that looked at universal basic income. So there is some empirical evidence of what happens, right? And I found it interesting that once a universal income was provided, there were better outcomes when it came to things like health and education.
Yeah. So
what's happening there?
And this is the most powerful stuff of universal basic income, is that it's very human. So Mincom, in that Canadian town you're describing, what they found was that hospital visits went down 9%. They found that domestic violence went down, mental health went up, and children stayed in school longer. In another study in North Carolina, they actually found that children's personalities changed to become more conscientious and agreeable, which are both very positive traits for academic and professional success. So this is what we're talking about at the human level. Right now, you know what's really, really expensive? Dysfunction. People coming to the emergency room and then having massive problems that we as a society end up paying for in various ways. Functionality is actually much less expensive.
Right.
So we're going to get hundreds of billions back from things we're currently spending on healthcare and incarceration and homelessness. And then as the economy grows, because we're putting money in the hands of American consumers, we get 25% of the growth back, because that's the ratio of revenue to GDP growth in the US. So with a VAT of 10%, you essentially pay for $1,000 a month per American adult in perpetuity.
You bring up this notion of improving lives with economic security. It reminds me that this show is called Ethics Matter, and so we talk a lot about what rights are and what human rights are. I feel like this country is not in a place yet where there's a sense that it's government's responsibility that everyone has economic rights and environmental rights and economic security. What do you think?
Well, you know, I think America has been very fortunate for a very long time, but I think our economy and society are progressing to a point where the absence of a government point of view or action is actually going to greatly diminish individual economic rights and our quality of life, really. If we just let this thing go, we can all see what's going to happen. I mean, the value is just going to get gathered up in a relatively small number of hands of people, generally at the heads of major technology companies and the people that work in those organizations. Now, I'm friends with those people. They are generally good people. The thing that I think is ridiculous is when people imagine that it's somehow the innovator's responsibility to figure out all of the downstream economic and social impacts of their innovations. I mean, they have their heads down just trying to make the thing work.
Yeah.
It is our government's job and our leaders' job to figure out all of the downstream effects and make appropriate policies and changes. And that's where we've fallen asleep at the switch. Our government has become very backward and dysfunctional. We've lost faith in it. And over the last 50 years, we've just been stuck with this 60s era bureaucracy having food fights from decades ago, instead of a government that's appropriate to the challenges of 2018 and 2020. And that's why I'm running for president. So about universal basic income, the social benefits, and it was a lot of fun, like reading the studies that some of which you cited. But I go through it in my book in detail, and it's clear to me that universal basic income would improve the lives of millions of Americans, that we can easily afford it. The thing that most people do not realize, I didn't realize until I dug into it, we actually came this close to passing a universal basic income in 1971. Martin Luther King was for it.
That was under Nixon.
Nixon was for it. 1,000 economists signed a letter saying this would be great. It passed the House of Representatives, and then it stalled in the Senate because the Democrats wanted more money for it. It wasn't that conservatives tanked it. It was that it was that
Wow.
Senate Democrats thought that it should be more generous. So it's not even very radical. Like we came this close, and it's been implemented in Alaska for 25 years in essence through the petroleum dividend.
How do you change the narrative around it being a government handout that will lead to a lazy society? Because I can just see that's what you're going to be up against.
Yeah, probably right.
And you said that you've met with lawmakers and throughout your career. So, how do you sell it?
I'm actually very confident that people are over the sort of welfare handout framing, in large part because the suffering is so widespread. Like the welfare framing was often about like the other. It was like, oh, you're going to give them the money.
But now it's a lot of us.
Yeah, now it's a lot. It's enough people now where. The most recent polling shows that support for universal basic income is about 50-50 right now, and it's just going to go up from there.
Andrew Yang, what an interesting and fascinating and I think relevant perspective you bring. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.